O'Connor, and a lot of you already know me because you're in my classes or have been in my classes before, and some of the people from the community and campus. What we're going to do is give Dr. Fortunates the maximum amount of time, but before we do that, I'm going to introduce you to the student body president, Pasadena City College, Christina, is it correctly? Javier, I'll get that J sound mixed, Javier. She's one of my former students in general biology here at Pasadena City College. So if any of you in Bio 11, this is what you can aspire to, be student body president of Pasadena City College. And so Christina is going to be introducing formally our speaker. And I'm glad you're here. You're in for a treat with a good buddy of mine. And Dr. Vince Fortunates is going to give you some really good insight. Christina?
Hello, everyone. I have the great honor of introducing our speaker tonight. He is a nationally renowned physician, graduate from Yale and USC, local school, and he's quite awarded. He's been on shows such as 60 Minutes, USA Today, the Today Show, Dr. Phil. And we're very lucky to have him in his deep care we're very lucky to have him as a resource at our school. And so I apologize, this is last minute, but I'm just grateful for having him at our school, and the associate students have been lucky enough to work with Dr. Connor in promoting health on campus. So thank you, Dr. Vincent and Fortunates.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for having me here, and in particular Dr. Connor. You know, there are certain people who do a lot of thinking, and these are the people, you know, that think. There's some people who think and they never really do, and they're called really the dreamers. And there's a lot of people who just do, but they never think, and they're the troublemakers. And then there's those that think and then do. And they are the true leaders of our society, like Dr. Connor, a very, very close friend. And I think someone to be honored, somebody to be followed, somebody to be emulated. All right? Well, today's talk, I want to thank all the faculty here too, and all the students that have come, and friends that I see in the audience. First, before beginning, I just want to, in case people do not know what Alzheimer's disease is and dementia. Dementia is sort of the classification, the overall classification. And it comes from two Latin words, from de and mentis. And mentis means, of course, mind. De means out of. So essentially, out of one's mind. People who aren't thinking correctly. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. And so it consists of about 60 to 70% of all the dementias. And so it's a very important one for us to take a look at. And I'd like to do something before really beginning. I always like to start off with a little story. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is one of my favorite authors, and everybody here, I'm sure, knows what he wrote. Sherlock Holmes. And he was born in 1859, and believe it or not, he was a medical student. But he was so enthralled with forensic medicine that he started to write stories. And the stories he wrote were those of Sherlock Holmes. And he wrote 59 books, except there's one that he wrote that I'm about to tell you about. It's the 60th. And you're the first people to hear about this. Well, he had just finished one of his major capers. And Dr. Watson turned to him and he said, Sherlock, he says, you're not getting enough sleep. You're overstressed. We have to do something about this. He says, I'm going to get you on a vacation, but one where no one can find you, because you need your rest. Well, sure enough, where would they go where they couldn't find Sherlock? So he took them to that is, Dr. Watson took him camping. And, you know, what better place? But one night, Sherlock turned to Dr. Watson and said, Sherlock, Sherlock, look up. What do you see? And Dr. Watson looked up and said, well, Sherlock, I see thousands of stars. He says, well, what does that mean to you, Dr. Watson? Dr. Watson said, well, there must, astrologically, there must be hundreds of galaxies. He says, what else? Well, meteorologically, it's going to be a fine, fine day. He says, what else? Well, theologically, there must be an omnipotent being to have created all of this, Sherlock. Sherlock, what does it mean to you? Someone stole our tent. Well, why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story primarily because sometimes we are oblivious to the obvious. Today, there is an epidemic. It's an epidemic amongst us. I think everybody up here will take a look, and they'll see those who are a little bit older, like me, will recognize this picture of John F. Kennedy and his wife. Everybody remembers this one. 9/11, our anniversary just 2 days ago, or yesterday, I should say. And I think each one of you remember where you were, what time of day it was, because I have other events that I remember. And I remember one time, it was October 6th, and it was exactly 3:03 in the morning. And the reason why I remember that, because the telephone went off. And as I grabbed the telephone and picked it up, I heard my mother's voice on it. And if you knew my mom and my father, I was one of these really lucky kids. You know, my dad was no doubt the captain of the ship, but my mom was the ship. She was the balance. She was the security. She was the sure individual who was always there. But I'll tell you, that morning, my mother did not feel or sound calm. She was frantic. And in the background, my dad, who I never heard yell, was screaming, "What did you do with Rose? Where is she? You're not her. You're an imposter." My dad did not know who my mother was. And it was at that moment that I stopped becoming a doctor, and I became just like everyone else. I was frightened, and I was a neurologist. And my mom asked me, "Please speak to your dad. Tell him who I am." This is what happens with Alzheimer's disease. Your mother, your father, your brother, your aunt, your uncle will turn around and not even recognize who you are. Just picture yourselves one day turning around to your dad and realizing that he has no idea who you are. In fact, he's accusing you of terrible things. My dad was there. I could see him. I could touch him. But I could never again reach him. And that is the terror of Alzheimer's disease. It has reached epidemic proportions. As I had said, everybody from my era remembers this picture. This is the 1940s and 1950s. Every morning, I went to a Catholic school, and when I'd wake up every morning, because of the picture that was on the bulletin board, and we had to pray every morning for this student who was a year ahead of me, who one morning woke up, and that very same day ended up in one of these iron lungs. And each one of us feared that someday we may wake up in one of those lungs, captive, unable to move, many really unable to talk. This was the polio epidemic. But now we have another epidemic. We have another tidal wave that has hit us. And that tidal wave is the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. Right now, there are 70 million baby boomers, including 40 million Americans over 62. Those over 65, back in 1954, there were only 500,000 cases overall of dementia, really only 300,000 cases of Alzheimer's disease. In 2005, we had 5.4 million. What the scary part of it is many people say, well, Alzheimer's disease is occurring. Why? Because we're getting older. But how does it explain this? That is, under 65, the rate went from 25,000, and now we have 620,000. There's been a 5% increase every 3 years. And I will tell you, the tidal wave has not hit us yet. And it is going to hit your parents. Because they, as you will see, they have been on a diet and a lifestyle that induces Alzheimer's disease. What we've had really is a failure of modern medicine. Medicine has increased our lifespan, but not our brain span. And the question is how meaningful is life, a long life, without our memories, without our ability to even know who our wife is, who our brother is, who our children are. You may be looking at this and saying, well, you know, why is this person looking so miserable? Well, there's a reason. One of the worst things, remember the iron lung I just showed you? Being captive? Well, the fact is that according to the American Academy of Neurology, by the time you are diagnosed to have Alzheimer's disease, and by the way, the first pathological findings of Alzheimer's disease often begin 30 years before the first sign. And so as you can see, all those people under 65, many of them were getting the disease in their 20s, in their early 30s. However, the symptoms don't occur until there's enough damage that it really impairs your abilities. But the scariest part of all is that the life expectancy after it is almost 9 years now, with 30% are in nursing homes within the first year, 70% within 2.5 years. And right now, 50% of all nursing home patients have a diagnosis of dementia. The saddest part of all is that the last 7 years, when you get Alzheimer's disease, you will be in a nursing home alone, away from your family, away from the very place you brought up your children, or where you were brought up. And it truly is a fate worse than death. And one of the sad things as a neurologist, know is that you would think that when a loved one was put into a nursing home, the family would visit. I will tell you that after the first year that they're there, the families rarely ever come. And the reason why? It is so painful to see the person who they love. And many of them will say, no, that person died, but they haven't. This speaks for itself. Could this be part of your future? And one of the things that you have to really look at is why. You know, why, when the United States has only 3% of the population, we have 18% of all the cases of Alzheimer's disease. And if you throw in Europe, another country which is affluent, we have 34% of all the Alzheimer's, yet only 7 to 8% of the total population of the world. Why should we have this epidemic when, in the last 50 years, our standard of living has what? Tripled. We have made more advances in the past 50 years than we've made in the last 2,500 years in medicine. Then why? Why is this a disease of the affluent societies? And the reason really is very, very simple. And it also gives us the treatment. The reason is because of what I call our sad lifestyle. And the S stands for sleepless, stressful, sedentary. Now let me tell you a little about each one of them. Sedentary. Take a look at this. People, this green area means that they exercise regularly. People over 65, less than 5% exercise regularly. This is where the real sad part. 18 to 24, 12% exercise at least 3 times a week. Look at that blue. That means they don't exercise. Red, very little. This did not exist back in 1954. When we looked at the same statistics back in 1954, it was almost reversed. 60 to 70% of kids between 18 and 24 exercised on a regular basis. Does that have anything to do with it? You will see. Yes, it does. Second, sleepless. In 1926 to 1954, the average amount of sleep that we got was 9.5 hours. In 2006, the average sleep we received was 6.5. And I asked the question, is it because we have no place or no time to sleep? No. It is self-imposed. For those who are over 50, it's usually TV. For those under 50, by the way, the rate of sleep in 1954 for those who are under 30 years of age, and that is most of your students' age, it was approximately 10 hours. The average sleep that a college student gets and high school student gets right now is also 6.5 hours. And you're going to see why that is one of the main reasons that students aren't doing as well and are overweight and are having as many psychological difficulties. And that's also one of the reasons why so many marriages nowadays, long-term marriages, are breaking up. I'll go into this at the end, but it's a very, very important point, because sleep builds dopamine and serotonin, the 2 neurotransmitters that are responsible for our executive functioning, our non-addictive behavior, and our feelings of calm and contentment and feelings of well-being. Did you know that in 1954, when the average student was asked how they felt, 87% gave a positive answer? Do you know when the average student is asked how they feel now, 70% say poorly. Less than 30% have a positive response. And we've tripled our standard of living. What's the difference? What has made the difference? Well, maybe bad parents. I guess everybody would agree on that, huh? Stress. The American Psychology Association says in a rather extensive review that 70% of Americans claim extreme stress 1 or more days a week. You know, the amazing thing is that back in the 1950s and 60s, when students were asked, did they think that they were going to do better than their parents, almost 95% said yes. That's almost been reversed 40 years later, 40 to 50 years later. Now, most students don't think they're going to do as well as their parents did. When students were asked, did they look forward to getting out and getting a job, and would they get a job that they liked, the response back in the 50s and 60s was positive in almost 70% of the cases. Now, it has completely reversed. Aging. We talked about the sad lifestyle. The first was the 3 S's I gave you, then the A is aging. That does definitely have something to do with Alzheimer's disease. Because right now, our life expectancy, as you can see, since the 1900s has increased by 35 years. But as I had said, our brain span hasn't increased a single day. By 2010, that's in about a year, the number of people between 55 and 75 are going to equal those between 35 and 55 years of age. In Europe, those people who are over 50 years of age already outnumber those under 50 years of age. We have 130 million Americans right now rushing towards Alzheimer's disease. And why is that important? Because Social Security right now is being strained to the limit. Today we spend $140 billion just on Alzheimer's disease. Within the next 10 years, it is estimated it's going to be $300 billion. What is that going to do to our Social Security system? What is that going to do to your ability to get Social Security? So therefore, we must do something about this. If societies that aren't affluent aren't getting it, then what can we do? Well, this guy over here is me before I got a toupee. So, but diet. What does diet have to do with it all? All right? Well, diet has everything to do with it. But it's only one small part. As a cause of Alzheimer's disease. As you can see, icebergs, how much is above the water? 10%. 90% is below. What we did back in 1970, the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, found that in a Framingham study, which was a very large study to study why people get heart attacks, they found out that fats were a major cause. So what they did is that they produced what I call the Titanic food pyramid, or iceberg, and which, as you can see here, sunk the American people into Alzheimer's disease. Why? As I had said, the Framingham study showed that fat-heart connection, all right? And what they did is that instead of the FDA going to the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, and saying, hey, is it real? What should we do about this? How are we going to stop this? They went to the USDA, which are the food manufacturers. And the food manufacturers, in all their wisdom, said, we know what to do. We're going to produce cereals, sugar cereals. We're going to get more and more pasta. And in fact, the FDA went along with it and created a food pyramid that consisted of 60 to 70% carbohydrates and 30% fat and protein. In fact, they almost eliminated the fat. And now we know that that is one of the major causes of Alzheimer's disease. When you take an unrefined carbohydrate that is different from a complex carbohydrate like, like vegetables or fruits. I mean, this is candy. This is bread. This is pasta. What happens is that this carbohydrate causes your insulin to peak. When insulin goes high suddenly, the brain, through a complex number of enzymes, winds up leaving an amyloid stain on the brain. Amyloid is the toxic substance that causes Alzheimer's disease. And you can see what I have here is that carbohydrates cause amyloid, which cause Alzheimer's disease. It's just like smoking causes tar and causes lung disease. So every time you go to a restaurant or you pick up and the first thing that you eat is a carbohydrate, it's like smoking a cigarette. And I'll go back to why the restaurants are really the enemy of the American mind. We have salt here. This is one of the other things. There's a difference between habit, dependency, and addiction. And what I'm talking about here is that a habit is one when you go home, you want to have a little drink to relax, whatever have you. a dependency is when you're driving home and you got to get there real quick because you really need that drink. Right? A habit, I should say, an addiction is when you're running people over to get there, and if you don't get that drink, hell will break out, and you will start sweating, and you will go through withdrawal. There's interesting, MSG is in almost, you ever go to a bar, and every bar that, I know you guys don't go to bars, and children, you wouldn't go to bars. Anyway, but you always go, they give away these free nuts. Aren't they nice guys? You know what they're laced with? They're laced with MSG. Because MSG, what it does is it lights up the nervous system. It goes to the brain, provokes an enzyme in the brain called ghrelin, which says, I want carbohydrates. One of the best carbohydrates is liquor. And it'll cause you to drink 2 or 3 times as much. You never see any Coke commercials anymore with people saying that lose weight. You know why? Because every single study that's been done, when you've had a diet drink and you're using it to lose weight, guess what? You gain it. Because the brain isn't fooled. The brain thinks that it's a carbohydrate. And carbohydrates beget carbohydrates because they go to the brain and they stimulate that same hormone called ghrelin. And ghrelin, I call it gremulins because it is like a gremlin. It comes down and it says, I need more carbohydrates. Now, here's a fact. Fat America, we are consuming 6 times the amount of trans fats. Trans fats are important because they have electrons which are unpaired. An unpaired electron seeks another one, and what it does, it runs around the body and it tries to take an electron off a cell, membrane, the nucleus of a cell, and most people also don't realize that that each cell in the body is bombarded almost 1,000 times a day by these unpaired electrons. But we have a great deal of protection when we're young, and that is called our hormones. Later on, we have to protect ourselves with antioxidants. Obesity right now, in 1950, the obesity and overweight was 13%. In 2006, obesity and overweight is now 67%. This is a great one, 25.6%, 2000. In 2000, the American Medical Association declared that, obesity was reaching 20% in 2000. And they were going to institute a nationwide call to arms, to stop this obesity. And this is what has happened. In the next 8 years, we've increased it 6% more. Because why? What is causing us when we know that carbohydrates are the worst thing that we can do to our brain, our heart, our arteries? Why are we eating more? Remember about the sad lifestyle, sleeplessness, uncontrolled stress? That's the reason why. Dopamine, serotonin. Oh, just wanted to show you how bad things have become. KFC sponsored the David to come to America back in 1997. 2 years later, they brought the David back. Here's something that's sad. Women who are overweight or obese, that is a waist size of 30, is overweight, 35 obese, have a 300% increase rate of Alzheimer's disease. Not only that, but when you begin to gain weight, fat is not an amorphous substance. That means it doesn't just lie there and it's just not a thing. Fat is a substance that begets more fat. There's an enzyme given off by fat that causes insulin to peak. When insulin peaks, it also goes to the brain and causes a need for carbohydrates. And then that carbohydrate crave causes the ghrelin to be produced once again and increases our craving for carbohydrates, more carbohydrates, and therefore we get fatter. And so fat actually does beget fat. And the other thing that's very important is that one of the reasons why women have this increase in Alzheimer's disease is because of the ratio of fat to lean muscle mass. And they have a much higher, women have a much higher ratio than men do. But even men have a higher rate of Alzheimer's disease if they're overweight. And right now, 50% of the men who are over 50 years of age are overweight or obese in the United States. Well, I just bring in this, the one that I just skipped over, and I don't know how to go back here. One of the things that has happened is that we have been told that there's going to be some type of cure, that there's going to be some type of magic bullet that's coming down, magic pill, magic bean. In the past year, we spent $9.6 billion on 3 medications that we thought were going to really eradicate Alzheimer's disease. You know, the sad part of it is that the people who were on the placebo, that is, the people who did not take the treatment, did better than those who did. The American Academy of Neurology has clearly said there is no magic bullet on the horizon. The only treatment available right now is prevention. The question is, you know, do I have Alzheimer's disease? And, you know, I don't think many of the students here will know who played Scarlett in Gone with the Wind. But, you know, do you know who, well, I can't remember, you know. And then the next question, you know, is, you know, did I lose my keys or my mind? Or did you take them? And that's a very important, that's the differentiation between people who have regular cognitive decline, something that is expected as we get older, than those people who are actually losing their mind. Because after a while, you know that you lost your keys, but after a while, you begin thinking that people are playing games on you, and actually someone is taking your keys. And then finally, what is his name? What is my name? And this always reminds me of Sue and Mary, you know. Sue and Mary were at a convalescent home, and you're not a well, it was a home for the elderly. And Sue came down and was talking to Mary and said, you know, Mary, I am really depressed. She said, I'm losing my mind. She said, you know, I get to the bottom of the stairs, and I can't remember if I just went up, I was coming down. So John was, another old elderly gentleman, was sitting right next to him and looked at the 2 older women and said, knock on wood, my memory is better than it's ever been. By the way, Sue, somebody's at the door. Guys, come on, yeah? Get a break here. That's pretty good, you know? Huh? Oh, you got the iron faces over here. All right, what are the possible diagnoses? We have to really understand the difference between age-appropriate loss, mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease. Big question now is that are you a couple, but you still have a couple left, and it keeps you functioning. Other things, were they diabetic, obese, alcoholic, smokers? And most important, do any of your parents snore? If your parents snore, their rate of Alzheimer's may be increased by 6 to 16-fold. And I'll explain why. Remember when we talked about sleeplessness? People who snore and have sleep apnea never get into stage 3 and 4 sleep where you build dopamine and serotonin, and so are chronically in a state of deficiency where they will carbohydrate crave, and they will not be able to really control their life, and minor stresses will become major stresses to them. Because it really is that serotonin which keeps us calm and really does allow us to take our exams better. That's the reason why we tell students, you know, I didn't listen, to tell you the truth, but when my professor would say, get a good night's sleep, they didn't really know why they were saying that. They just said it because I guess that was the thing to say. Now we have medical proof to show that getting a good night's sleep decreasing your stress will double your mental agility the following day. And mental agility is what you need on an examination. And I'm going to go through a little bit of, right now, the difference between mental agility and mental capacity. And I always say this, and especially when I'm speaking to an older crowd, which I'm not speaking to right now, they're always afraid that these young people are going to come along and take their jobs, you know? And, you know, there's a scary statistic. You know what that scary statistic says? Is that when you, by the time you reach 50 years of age, you have lost 50 to 60% of your mental agility. And that is your ability to multitask, your ability to come up quickly with answers, your ability to look at all the options and assess them. And by the way, until about a year ago, I didn't believe that. I said, you know, you're trying to tell me this whippersnapper, this intern over here knows more than I do? What, are you kidding me? I can run circles around him. This kid doesn't stand a chance against me. He'll never get my job. In fact, nobody really ever wants my job. You saw what I do. I take care of a lot of very, very ill people. And most of them don't make it. You know, that's unfortunately what neurologists do. Well, you know, I got this brain age game. I heard about this brain age game. It would tell me about my mental agility. And so I got the game, and we've seen it. And what they do is that they have a color that comes up, right? Instead of naming, they'll have yellow, right? But the yellow will really be in black. So what you're supposed to say is black, not the what is written there, yellow, right? So I get it, and I get it like this, and I was saying, yo, yellow, bzz, black, green, bzz, black, bzz, blah, blue, bzz, bzz, bzz. And all of a sudden I'm through with the game, and this big number comes up, 80. I said, wow, the 80 percentile, that's not too bad for the first time. And then all of a sudden it says 80 years old. I had the brain of an 80-year-old. Well, this game was defective. I knew that. I went to Yale. Are you kidding me? Oh, well. So I didn't stress out about it, but for the next 2 hours, I worked at it until I was only 40. And I said, you know, you have determination, you could do anything. So the next morning, I wake up, and I'm downstairs, and my son's there, 20, and he has one of his friends who, really nice kid, but, you know, definitely not the sharpest knife in the drawer, right? Good kid, I mean, you know, but he didn't quite make it through high school. And so I have the game in my hand, because I fell asleep with it, practicing all night. Well, anyway, I take it down, and I said, hey, you guys, take this exam. So the young boy picks it up, Jim, and he looks at it, and he says, okay, doctor. And a big number, 20, comes up. He did it the first time, and he got a 20. I did it the first time, and I got an 80. The 100th time, I got a 40. This is the difference in mental agility. This is what they're talking about when they talk about mental agility. Just like, you know, if my 20-year-old son runs around circles around me, around the basketball court, am I astonished? Why, no. I got 60-year-old legs. And that is the difference. However, there's a big difference between mental agility and mental capacity. Mental capacity has to do with all the information that is stored, all the memory that is stored in your dendrite bulbs. And that, no matter what age you're at, you can maintain and you can increase. And as long as your mental capacity is there, you do not have Alzheimer's disease. And this is why there is such hope for older people like me. You know? I know I'm not going to get that mental agility back. All right? I'm not going to get my legs back. But I can keep my capacity. And that is what we have to work at. And that is what the anti-Alzheimer's prescription is all about, is that how to maintain that brain. Because there is no medication out there, and so therefore we have no other alternative but to change our lifestyle. The very lifestyle that is causing the disease is the lifestyle that we have to change. Now, I had put down the slide before was on stress, right? And one of the things that I found out in my practice, that out of all the professions, you know what the 3 professions that got Alzheimer's more than any others? First were policemen, second was lawyers, and most of all, physicians. Why? Because of sleeplessness and uncontrolled stress and the inability to be on any type of sane lifestyle that is conducive to a healthy brain. And I just throw this thing in because most people don't realize is that there are actually blood tests that can be given that can tell if you have an increased rate of Alzheimer's disease, like homocysteine level. Doctors don't order it. If you have a high homocysteine level, you have a 3.5 times increase, 350% increase in Alzheimer's disease. If you have C-reactive protein, also, it doubles to triples your chances of having Alzheimer's disease. Thyroid panel is so important. Folic acid, these are treatable causes. Diabetes, especially insulin-resistant diabetes. A lot of, about 16 to 17% of the people in the United States have diabetes. Another 50% have insulin-resistant diabetes. And that is that their cells are no longer responding to insulin, which causes the insulin levels to rise even further. And remember, when insulin levels go high, what it does to the brain? It leaves that stain, like smoking a cigarette. And it's like they're not even doing anything wrong, and they're peaking that insulin. And that's because of the carbohydrate diet they had been on all their life. It has nothing even to do with genetics necessarily. And then, of course, there's a lot of environmental factors, pesticides, aluminum, copper, etc. Now, prevention is where it's at. 70% of all cases can be prevented, 30% can be delayed. And the question is, are you in control? Because you can increase your risk, right? That is, at 60 years of age, generally in the population of the United States, 1 in 100 people have it. You could increase it to 1 in 20. Or you could decrease it to 1 in 1,000. It depends on you. At 70, 1 in 5, according to the American Academy of Neurology, have serious memory problems. That could increase to almost 60% instead of from 20%, or down to 1 in 100. At 85 years of age, and this is one of the saddest statistics, is that when you reach 85 years of age, 50% of the people in the United States have Alzheimer's disease. And after 85, it levels off. So what has happened is that that Alzheimer's disease is lifestyle induced. It's what you do to yourself that it does, that causes it. All right, and then we come up to the DEAR program. And the DEAR program is what the anti-Alzheimer's prescription is all about. It's about diet. We call it the harmonic diet. Exercise, what I call the Fort formula. Accentuating, the A is for accentuating the brain's reserve of neurobics, and R is for rest and relaxation. And throughout the book, what I tried to do is we found out at Yale that if a person understood why they were on a lifestyle change or a diet, and they understood the rationale behind it, the chances of maintaining that diet 3 months later was 56% if they understood it. It was less than 18% after 1 month if they did not. So what I do is as you can see, by this harmonic, this hormonal symphony, the piano and strings are represented by the anabolic hormones, growth hormone, testosterone, estrogen, also thyroid hormone. And the neurotransmitter is dopamine and serotonin. The catabolic, or what we call the aging hormones, which are the drums and the brass, are cortisol and aldosterone, and the neurotransmitters adrenaline and noradrenaline. And the conductor of this whole thing is insulin. And what you learn is that if you can keep insulin in balance, you will not get Alzheimer's disease. And that's, this next slide is all about the balance. And I'll just skip over these two because there's certain aging factors. You know, there's this old myth about 60 is the new 40. Well, you know, that's what we tell ourselves. That's what we'd like to believe. But let me tell you, it isn't true. Because listen to this. Your youth hormones and repair hormones, like, you know, testosterone, estrogen, decrease by 90% by the time you hit 70 years of age. In fact, you lose 60% of them between 50 and 70. Your aging hormones, cortisol, you know, why can't they go down too? I mean, this is really unfair. If there's a God, which I believe there is, why did he do this? Now, our stress hormones increase 60% after 50 years of age. So here we are losing our youth, and our aging is racing ahead. That's the reason why most people, they don't look too much different until they hit about 50. And then all of a sudden, 50, you hit the skids. Ah, Dr. Collins is laughing. All right. Now, not only do you hit the skids, but your serotonin and dopamine and calm and control, feel good decrease with age. And with the cortisol going up, your muscle mass decreases between 50 and 70 years of age by 26%. That means you lose 26% of your strength fibers, not your endurance fibers. And this is so important to know. So when you have an older parent who's saying, well, I go out and I walk, and they're over 50, that's not doing anything to their muscles. They need strength training. Strength decreases between 30 and 70 by 50%. Brain mass decreases by 20%. Brain volume decreases up to 5% a year when you get Alzheimer's disease. Up to 5% a year. Generally, it's about 2.5%, 3%. And socialization decreases from 50 to 80 by 90%. And why is that important? Because believe it or not, socialization and meditation are the two other ways that you can build dopamine and serotonin in the body. Those all-important willpower true neurotransmitters. And if you don't have them, I always tell people about, you know, what do I mean by dopamine and serotonin, how important they are. Well, I'd say about 10, 15 years ago, I came home from the emergency room at 3 o'clock in the morning. All right? I woke up about 8. And I wandered over, and all of a sudden I saw this fat, ugly, old guy looking at this picture. I had no idea where they got this frame and put this guy in until I realized that it was a mirror. I don't know if I like to brag. Can I brag, Joe? But I was in our 1964 Olympic team. You know what I was? I was a weightlifter. I once held the world press record. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean that. Sorry, guys. My wife would be kicking me right. You braggart, you. Well, the person that was there was 242 pounds. I weighed 181 back in the old days. He had crags in his face, bags under his eyes. And I decided at that moment that was the end. I ran downstairs. I opened up the cupboard. Right in front of the oatmeal was this big bag of what? Donuts. I took those donuts, I threw them into the garbage, and I grabbed that oatmeal, and I started cooking it. And as I was just about to taste it, my beeper went off. And it was, you know, the old days when we had the digital beepers. You know, they had writing in them, you know, and you press them, and you look down. You know what it said? Doctor, your patient has been waiting in the emergency room since 4 o'clock. My God, I had abandoned a patient. My anxiety just soared. I couldn't tell you how I felt. My blood pressure went up, my pulse was racing. I dropped the spoon. As I rushed out, I pushed my hand into the garbage, grabbed out those donuts, with one in my mouth and the other one in a fist. I drove to the emergency room. Now, was it because me as a doctor I didn't know what I was doing, that I didn't have control. You know, I had to have a lot of control to be an Olympian. I had to have a lot of control to make it through medical school. What happened to it all? What happened to it all was that I had no dopamine, I had no serotonin. I had no control. And it's one of the reasons why the American Academy of Neurology last year, I should say the American Medical Association last year came out with the figures that 60% of the doctors are overweight or obese. We have one of the highest rates of addictions. Why? It's because we didn't have a good upbringing? We don't have an education? It's because of not having dopamine and serotonin. One of the reasons why students don't do as well nowadays is for the exact same reason. They're not getting sleep. What are they doing at night? Either TV, talking on the telephone with their friends, their mobile phones, or they're doing video games, many of them which are violent, which will increase your cortisol levels. Cortisol levels decreased to a minimum during night, and there's a reason for it. It gives the brain a chance to rest. When you do something that is stimulating before going to bed, it augments those cortisol levels. You never get a chance to rest. Not only that, but low cortisol levels are necessary in order to build dopamine and serotonin. It really makes sense. And that's what this book, The Anti-Alzheimer's Prescription, is all about. Making sense so that you can be a success. And I can give you, and which I will right now, I'm going to give you the diet. The harmonic diet. And I call it the harmonic diet because it's not only important what you eat, but what you eat is not enough. If you're just eating berries, eventually that's going to cause your glucose to go really high. You have to know what proportions, the harmonic proportions, are 1/3 fat, 1/3 protein, 1/3 carbohydrate, and they should be complex carbohydrates. What that'll do is that it will cause glucagon to be secreted rather than insulin. Glucagon creates glucose into protein, lean muscle mass. Insulin converts glucose into fat. And this is one of the reasons why when I used to put people on high carbohydrate diets, because that's what I was told by the FDA, that was, you know, we really don't take any dietary courses in medical school. Now we do. But I was putting people on high carbohydrate diets, and I was wondering why they were getting fatter. In fact, they were losing muscle mass. So, and it's not only important, remember this, it's not only important to understand what proportions, but what order. And I call the American restaurant the great enemy to the American brain. Why? What is the first thing they put on the table? And it's not water, because they don't do that anymore here in California, right? For conservation, what is it they put on the table? Bread. Warm bread. And butter. Well, as soon as you put that bread into your mouth, what happens? Insulin peaks. It's like you might as well lit up a cigarette. Glucagon is secreted, is depressed. Insulin is increased. What should you do? No bread at the beginning. Take an appetizer. Fish, meat, cheese. Have, salad with oil and balsamic vinegar, which has resveratrol in it. If that's the active ingredient in the grape. Just like drinking a glass of wine. And when you start your entree, start it with the protein. Eat the meat first or the vegetable first. Then you can have the bread. Then you can have the potatoes. Because what has happened? You already have glucagon. Thanks so much. And there's a little figure over here is that everybody sees, in the restaurants, that little heart. I really believe we should have a little brain, for brain healthy foods. Because also to know, I put the heart in there, because whatever is good for the heart is good for the brain, and whatever is good for the brain is good for the heart. Isn't this fun? I didn't have anybody cheer. Okay, look. Anyway, desserts. Now, let me ask you students something. All right, I want to see mental agility here. Okay, mental agility. What do you see when you look at desserts? Can you see another word? Salivating. Ah, good. Dessert spelled backwards is stressed. Right. Whew. And I think that person is over 30. Very good. You guys, you're losing it. You're not sleeping. You're not sleeping. All right. Well, anyways, what the first thing you should do is about desserts. The chances are, if you eat bread at the beginning, you have a threefold increased chance that you're going to order a dessert, because what does that glucose do? It goes right to the brain. It stimulates ghrelin. Ghrelin causes carbohydrate craving. You need more, you eat more, and you want dessert. There's a reason why they put the bread on the table. They're not dumb. That's the reason why they put the peanuts on the bar with the MSG. Second, first step you take, desert the table. Second step, take a 1-mile leisure walk. We were all taught, don't exercise after eating. That is one of the worst things you could possibly, you don't over-exercise, but taking a nice leisurely walk, what it does is it takes all the glucose and it puts it right into the muscle where it should be and converts it into protein and gets rid of the glucose so you don't peak your insulin and you're keeping the conductor insulin under control. For men, no fluids after 7 p.m. and women too, because it causes you to wake and it disturbs your sleep. And read a relaxing book, laugh, listen to music. Don't pick up video games. Don't start calling friends, especially friends you don't like, or, you know, I'll talk about more about that later. All right, supplements. What supplements should you have? Everybody's into these supplements, and I mean, this is a quadrillion-dollar business nowadays. Do you really need all the supplements? One of the reasons I wrote this book was to show you that you don't need to spend a lot of money in order to have a healthy life. All those poor countries, you think they're spending millions of dollars on supplements and they're not getting Alzheimer's disease? No. The things that maybe you need, fish oil if you can afford it, or eat fish 3 times a week, then you don't need the fish oil. All right, folic acid, very important, because even despite all the vegetables that we get, as we get older, and especially because of stress in our lives, we need folic acid. Coenzyme Q if you're on any of the statins. You know, and they are the drugs that the anti-cholesterol drugs. If you have your parents that are on those drugs, please let them know 2 things. Is that the information that is coming out that's telling them that it decreases the rate of Alzheimer's disease is not true. All right? That it will decrease cardiovascular disease. There's no doubt about that. And by decreasing cardiovascular disease, sometimes it decreases dementia, because there's a type of dementia called multi-infarct dementia or stroke dementia. It'll decrease that. But in fact, now we have proof that it converts the brain cells that are being produced. Instead of becoming neurons that store information, they become structural cells. And so it's steering good cells away from brain function. And so you need this coenzyme Q. The final one is turmeric. All right, there's a Bright Shield. It's a supplement you can buy. It has turmeric and resveratrol. Turmeric is, we found because of India, there were certain places in India where they had almost no Alzheimer's disease. So over at USC and UCLA, we did some experiments with our old friends the rats and found out that it decreased amyloid deposits by 50%. So turmeric is very important. It's an Indian spice. Put it on your salads, put it in your dressings, put it on your food. You know, hopefully it'll help you. It should. And we call it the brain drain. You know, we lose 20% of our tissue, brain tissue. And the reason I have this down is because there's a fallacy that we have, and it's called that we have a fixed bank account theory. All right? And we were always taught in neurology back in the old days that we were born with, you know, so many cells, about 100 billion neurons and 900 billion structural cells. And that every time we bumped our head, took a glass of wine or alcohol, And as we aged, we lost a couple of thousand each time, until finally we were on empty and we had Alzheimer's disease. And that's simply everybody eventually, if they live long enough, are going to get it. Well, that is completely untrue. We have what we call an interest-bearing account. The brain is an interest-bearing account. If you don't use it, you lose it. But there are two special parts of the DEAR program. Remember we did diet? Now we're on to exercise and accentuating the brain's reserve, or neurobics. We have aerobics, anaerobics, which is weightlifting. Aerobics is, your general walking and running, etc. And neurobics is brain exercises. Both of these have now been proven to not only increase what we call the roots, or the dendrites, that come out of a neuron. So we have a neuron here, all right? We have a neuron there. And so this is a sight neuron, and this is a writing or drawing neuron. And so if you see something, an axon comes out, it connects with the axon on the other side, and when you see something, what can you do? You can draw it, or you could write it. Now, as Alzheimer's comes out and knocks that out, what happens is you can see it, but you can no longer write it, because there's no connection. What neurobics does is causes you to increase the number of dendrites connections. So for instance, when you meet somebody, all right, you could say, oh, my name is so-and-so, and you listen to his name, Tom.